All right, good evening. This is Chair Justin Cooley, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Would Deputy Clerk Megan Wilbanks please call roll?
Commissioner Flores?
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here.
Commissioner Khan will be absent. Commissioner Munoz-Morris?
Here.
Commissioner Tully will also be absent. Vice Chair Houghton?
I'm here.
Chair Cooley?
Here. All right, that brings us to public comment for items not on the agenda. At this time, we will hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. Deputy Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't received any requests to speak on non-agenda items at this time. However, if anybody in the audience would like to speak, please indicate. Okay, seeing none.
All right, that'll bring us to the consent calendar. The only item on consent is consideration of minutes from the February 12th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting. Before we vote, do any commissioners have comments on consent?
I do. Just a very minor on page 3 where the changes start, the first change listed, section 16.15.020.1.2. The last word says approved and it should be recorded was the intent.
All right, that makes sense. Any other changes or comments? Do we have a motion to approve as amended?
I'll move to approve as I amended.
I'll second that.
Great, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Okay, that takes us to item 4, our public hearings. Any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Item 4A on our agenda, consideration of the 2024 General Plan Annual Report, will be continued to the March 12th, 2025 meeting to allow staff additional time to verify development activity data. So we're moving on to 4B. The public hearing item before us is to review proposed circulation modifications to the previously approved 600 Tank Farm Road project. At this time, I'd like to ask each commissioner for their ex parte disclosures of contact with anyone who has provided information to commissioners not on the record, so that information may be used as part of their decision-making process. Any ex parte disclosures? Seeing none, and I have no disclosures to make. So would Senior Planner Callie Taylor and Contract Planner John Rickenbach please present the staff report?
This here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, I'm John Rickenbach, the contract planner. I'm working with Callie Taylor on this project. What I want to do is give you an overview. Hopefully it's about 10 minutes long, a little context about how we got here and what is being presented. I also want to let you know that we have Luke Schwartz here to answer any technical questions, engineering, public works wise or road wise, and they may come up. So we'll launch into it right here. First, let's just start with a recommendation. You have before you a resolution, a draft resolution, recommending that you forward to the City Council the approval of a modification of conditions of approval related to revised off-site public circulation improvements for a previously approved project, the 600 Tank Farm Road project, and also to approve an addendum to the previously certified final environmental impact report for the 600 Tank Farm Road project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. Little background and location. We're talking about the north side of Tank Farm Road, that little crook in the road near Broad, just west of Santa Fe, the south, the west of the Santa Fe intersection as it is right now. The 600 Tank Farm Road project, it's not real clear on this graphic, but it's that area within the black and yellow hatched on the north side of the road, just west of Acacia Creek. The surrounding uses, you've got the Damon Garcia sports fields to the north. To the east, you do have Acacia Creek and other approved mixed-use residential development at 650 Tank Farm Road. To the south, you have Tank Farm Road and undeveloped land, and to the west, undeveloped Union Oil property that extends along Tank Farm Road. Just as a reminder, what the approved project was back in February 2022, the council approved a 280 unit residential project, mixed use project, which includes high density and mixed use in there, along with a 12,500 square feet of commercial office space on an 11.7 acre site. It also included an acre of off-site transportation improvements, and it's within the airport area specific plan. Now, the required transportation improvements as approved included a roundabout at Tank Farm and Santa Fe, which was going to be extended to the north to access the site. It would be a northwest and south leg. There'd be a northwest and east leg only. There is no south leg. The existing south extension of Santa Fe would continue to be where it is right now. The new Santa Fe Road on the west would extend north of Tank Farm Road. The frontage along both Santa Fe and Tank Farm would be improved with sidewalks, landscaping, lighting, one-way sidewalk, level protected bike lanes. Other improvements that were required included a shared use path across Acacia Creek between Tank Farm Road and Damon Garcia Park, and then the preparation of 65% designs and related environmental studies for the future Tank Farm shared use path west of Santa Fe to Innovation Way. There'd be a temporary sidewalk east to Broad, if not constructed sooner by neighboring development, and the payment of impact fees as fair share toward the future Tank Farm Road improvements west of Santa Fe. Those were requirements. This graphic just sort of gives you a bird's eye picture of what that would look like without getting into the details of what are shown, but the key feature that was required is down in that bottom left-hand corner, the roundabout at Santa Fe and Tank Farm, and how the Santa Fe extension accesses 600 Tank Farm Road. So since the time the project was approved, a few things have happened. It's worth noting that before it was approved, the Active Transportation Committee back in 2020 had reviewed that project proposal, provided some comments that fed into the final design of the circulation features. Project was approved in February 2022. More recently, the Active Transportation Committee reviewed preliminary design alternatives for the future Tank Farm Road shared use path west of Santa Fe and provided more input. Since then, a few things have happened. Development of on-site and off-site plans and permitting has gone on, and then off-site right-of-way acquisition has commenced, but here's the issue. The applicant has been unable to acquire the necessary right-of-way from Union Oil Company of California to build the roundabout that would be required. Some of the land would be Union Oil land. And so as a result of that, and the city is aware of that, and staff has been working with the applicant on this issue, it became an issue, how do you design this to be able to have the project go forward without that right of way? So recently the applicant requested to pursue a modified project proposal because of that limitation. So here's the outline of that modified proposal. One, it would eliminate the planned roundabout at Tank Farm in Santa Fe and replace it with a modified interim access design until a roundabout could be built in the future when the required right-of-way is available. So it's an interim solution. The applicant requests another modified condition relating to underground utilities. I'll get into the details of that as well, since undergrounding the utilities was required as part of the original approval. The last two are important, though. There's no on-site land use or circulation modifications. The project is still the project. The development and the build-out is still exactly the same. No change to the on-site development, including the total number of units and the design of the development on site. I'll go into a little bit of depth on what those circulation improvements that are proposed would include. At Tank Farm and Santa Fe, instead of a roundabout, there'd be an unsignalized stop-controlled intersection. You'd also have minor road widening on Tank Farm Road to add an eastbound left turn lane into Santa Fe. That is, coming from the west, you'd be able to go north on Santa Fe, and a buffered on-site bike lanes along Tank Farm Road. So a lot of the safety features that were built into the original approval are still maintained under this proposal. Other circulation improvements would include frontage improvements along both Santa Fe and Tank Farm, landscape parkway lighting, street trees, and so forth, a two-way shared use path between Santa Fe and the Mine Body signal to the east toward Broad Street. There'd also be a temporary sidewalk on the north side of Tank Farm from the Mine Body signal to Broad, providing the connection from the project to Broad, which is the whole point of the connectivity in the original approval, until permanent sidewalks built by neighboring properties would be possible. Other traffic safety features would include landscape center median on Tank Farm to prevent illegal left turns, acceleration lanes, radar speed feedback signs, striping and warning signs to encourage safe speeds, and then ultimately signal modifications, Tank Farm and Mine Body at that intersection to add a pedestrian bike signal phasing and bike left turn box. This graphic is going to be a little bit hard to read, but in the big picture, this kind of shows you the layout of what these improvements do. With Tank Farm being the main east-west feature in this graphic, Santa Fe on the left side being the northbound roadway extension that would serve the project site. And the main thing you see here is no roundabout there. You see the intersection and how it would be designed. The green paths would also show more or less where bike improvements are along roadways. And as I say, Luke Schwartz is here available to answer any technical questions as they arise. This shows the extension as you go farther west on Tank Farm. The main feature you see here is the left turn lane on Tank Farm that would head north on Santa Fe. So the other condition I touched on at the beginning had to do with undergrounding utilities. The original project condition, as approved, required undergrounding 8 PG&E power poles and utility lines on the project site and along the frontage. The applicant requests that one of those power poles on site be allowed to remain overhead, citing cost and inability to obtain the easement needed to underground that pole. The developer proposes a conduit crossing Acacia Creek to the east to allow for future undergrounding of that pole and power line. The power pole wouldn't conflict with the interim circulation improvements or future roundabout. Again, this graphic is a little hard to read, but I just want you to be aware we have one in case you have any questions and have detailed concerns about that proposal. This shows you, and it's a little, if you know Tank Farm pretty well, you can see the pole that's in question that would be allowed to remain. It's right there near Acacia Creek on the north side of Tank Farm Road. So one of the things that Planning Commission in your purview need to determine in making your recommendation is the consistency of the proposal with the different city policies and programs that are relevant. So in the general plan, I just want to highlight a few of these here. Well, let's start with the land use element. The policy 10.4 encourages the projects which provide for and enhance active transportation modes, such as the pedestrian movement, bike access, and transit services, as provided in this project. In the circulation element, policies encourage the expansion of safe bike and pedestrian transportation networks. So staff has reviewed that and has determined that the project does provide safe multimodal access between the project site and non-residential destinations. Similarly, in the airport area specific plan, which this is located within, although it does show a roundabout at Tank Farm in Santa Fe, and the updated plan does not show that for reasons beyond the applicant's control. I'll touch on that in a moment. Another aspect of the specific plan establishes the intent for the road system to meet the access, mobility, and safety and design without over-designing the facilities. Those two taken in tandem allow us as staff and in the city engineer's opinion that the project does meet the intent of the airport area specific plan, especially since the applicant will still be preparing the design, providing right-of-way and fair share fees for the roundabout once it is eventually built once the land is available for that, so others could build that. Within the airport area specific plan, other aspects call for all new development to be responsible for undergrounding existing utilities and acknowledging that the interim utility solutions that are interim may be needed if permanent systems can't be made at the time of development. Again, taken in tandem, city staff has determined that the project does meet the intent of the specific plan policies here, since it will be designed to allow for future undergrounding of the last PG&E pole at a later date. This slide is important because about a month ago, this project was reviewed by the Active Transportation Committee and determined that these potential changes are consistent with the Active Transportation Plan, with a couple of recommendations that have since been incorporated into the project, including two-way shared use path on Tank Farm as an interim design that could be converted into separate one-way protected bike lane and sidewalk. And it's a similar concept for Santa Fe as well. Other aspects of city regulations don't really apply so much. The zoning regulations, the updated circulation improvements don't affect any aspect of zoning. So again, the development as approved still remains consistent with zoning. Similarly, the airport land use plan, the original project was found to be consistent with the airport land use plan in August 2021. We reached out to staff for the Airport Land Use Commission, and they determined that there was no need to have this project go back to them, and the proposed changes don't apply to any aspect of the Airport Land Use Plan. For CEQA compliance, a final EIR was certified in February 2022 for the original project when it was approved. For this effort, an addendum to the final EIR has been prepared for the proposed project, an addendum being something that does not get circulated because there are no new impacts or no substantive changes in the findings of the original EIR. That's part of your staff report packet. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but several conditions as originally approved were modified to address all the issues we brought up. So all these conditions relate in one way or another to the circulation or utility changes that were originally approved and now are proposed for modification. Again, the important ones here, and Luke could speak to these in a bit if you have questions, are conditions 113 through 118, which really get into the guts of the changes to the circulation system. And these are, again, relating to acknowledgement and indemnification issues for the revised version of the project. So with that, I'm going to get back to the recommendation that Planning Commission adopt the resolution before you, recommending approval to the City Council of the modified conditions related to the circulation and utilities improvements, and also to approve the addendum to the final EIR to comply with requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. The next step, if you recommend approval or with conditions or have comments, we'll be taking this to the City Council on April 1st. And with that, I hand it back to the chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioners, do we have any questions for staff? Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Excuse me. I have a couple of quick questions. I think a few you may have answered, but I just want to make sure that I understood correctly. The first one, if I remember correctly, the inability to acquire the land for the roundabout had something to do with some studies, some like environmental studies or something on the land. Is that correct?
The neighboring property, and I don't have the details here, but I do know that there's issues related to soil. There's cleanup efforts for there's soil issues that they're working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. It's not a question of them being unwilling partners. They just need to resolve some issues before they're in a position to be able to transfer any kind of land out of their hands.
I see. So like further remediation before we can
essentially
something like that. Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. And then the other two were around excuse me, essentially the cost of building the roundabout later down the road, as well as the pole that was mentioned. So you mentioned some fees, and it sounds like the applicants would provide some fees that would go towards the future, I guess, undergrounding of that pole and the roundabout. are those tied to, like, how do we account for like the increase in cost over time and like, delays and stuff? Like, is it a flat fee or is it kind of tied to future costs? Could you maybe speak a little bit about that?
We've got Luke right
I
here.
see Luke, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, Luke Schwartz, Transportation Manager. Yes, so there's kind of a couple of pieces to make sure we're collecting the fair share of the future roundabout improvements from this development. One is simply through participating in their development impact fees. So our traffic impact fee program already contemplates this roundabout project. So if they had nothing to do with this, just by paying their fees, they're providing a share of that. With that said, we know the cost of the roundabout has increased from when the last program was updated. So one of the conditions requires them to also pay their share of that increment cost from what we know has increased above the fee program that they're still vested under. The last piece of it is we've been working with the applicant team to make sure they can design their frontage to conform with the ultimate roundabout as much as possible. Thankfully, we have basically a 99% complete design for the roundabout. So their frontage improvements, their sidewalks, as many things as possible, we keep in the spot that they can stay when the roundabout moves forward. There will be some throwaway work of things that need to be reconstructed. So we're asking that the applicant basically contemplate those costs, escalate those to a reasonable year of construction. We're assuming, let's say 10 years. Look at a construction cost index and say, what would it cost for the city to undo portions of your frontage that would need to be reconstructed to build the roundabout? The fees we collect through the Development Impact Fee Program are escalated annually based on a California Construction Cost Index. So we might be estimating costs from when the program was last updated. In this case, it was 2019, but every year our fees, we escalate the value of that dollar. So we're making sure we're collecting enough to try to build these in the future when it's time.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. Last question. For the pole itself, I mean, I understand the issue with cost, and I really understand how the project, the compromise that we have in front of us. Is there some sort of set timeline or deadline for that occurring, or is it kind of like when we get to it, or could you maybe talk about that?
I'll defer this one to our development engineering staff. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. So thank you for the question. And regarding timeline for undergrounding the additional pole, that last pole, and that additional portion of the run that they're not proposing to do right now, there's not a set timeline for it because it's tied to a future project on the property across the street that would, again, trigger undergrounding. And at that point, that future connection via undergrounding would be made and that pole would be eliminated. So it's really driven by a future property owner across the street pursuing a project that triggers undergrounding.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. I'm all done.
Any other questions or comments for staff? Go ahead.
Follow up on the very last thing that was mentioned about the property across the street. Is that 650 Tank Farm that we're talking about, or is it across Tank Farm on the Santa Fe side?
That's a good question. If you want to go to the next photo where you show the street view image, that might be a little clearer. Yeah, so the property that I'm mentioning is actually kind of hard to see in this image, but it's the United Rentals property on the south side of Tank Farm.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, 650 Tank Farm is directly east of this project site. So because the power lines, as you can see in this image, cross from the north side of Tank Farm, diagonally across Tank Farm at that bend to the south side of Tank Farm, that 650 Tank Farm project isn't conditioned to underground those power lines because they're on the other side of the street. They have additional undergrounding on that project through their site, but those power lines would be tied to a development on the south side of the street.
So to take that pole out, would we have to underground across Tank Farm and tunnel under it?
Correct, yeah. So John, can you go back then one to the exhibit? So this was an exhibit submitted by the applicant after their conversations with both their electrical designer and contractor and PG&E. What you can see, if I can try to walk you all through it, is the green line on the north side or the uppermost side of Tank Farm on screen there is the line that is being proposed to remain to be undergrounded along their frontage. With
There's a bunch of green lines up there.
Sorry, right on Tank Farm Road. The rest of them are dimensions. Yeah, so right on the northern limit of what is shown as the roadway. There's the last little bit is the conduit they're proposing to put in for future undergrounding. The pole is basically at the right edge of that green line. The red lines that cross Tank Farm to the south and then cross what is the intersection with Santa Fe currently and go to the corner of the United Rentals property, that is the component that can't be done right now because of a lack of easements on the United Rentals property in favor of PG&E. They currently have a pole there and its guide, but the lines crossing diagonally across Tank Farm Road effectively hold that pole up and tension it with the existing guy wires. To remove those lines that cross Tank Farm, they have to set a new pole, have to set new guy wires because they have to go underground and come up that pole. So they require new overhead easements on the United Rental property, new underground easements on the United Rental property, and a new pole easement on the United Rental property. And that's what the applicant hasn't been able to get from United Rentals.
All right, so we've got two adjacent landowners that we have not been able to secure easements from for doing these two things, which are the changes, right? Do you feel like both of these parties have negotiated in good faith in this situation? It sounds like the union reasoning is about the environmental remediation. I have a question or two about that, and then United Rentals, are they doing their best to help with this, or what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the first things we did when this request for the variance for the one pole came in was we set a meeting with the applicant as well as PG&E staff to better understand what had been done to date to work with United Rentals. And the applicant's gone through a lengthy process of over a year now trying to get United Rentals to come to the table. It's my understanding they've gone all the way up to their, I think it's corporate legal, trying to get an agreement for these additional easements, and they've hit a brick wall with that process.
So we're like 3 years into that process, because this was approved 3 years ago, right?
Correct, yeah. They've been working for quite some time to try to get these easements in place. And ultimately what they're left with, if they can't get that from United Rentals, PG&E's told them, you can do the undergrounding, but you have to continue the undergrounding all the way to the signal where Mine Bodies intersection
Which are you referring to in this case, the applicant?
Yes, correct. If the applicant's not able to get the easements from United Rentals in order to complete the removal of the pole on their site, complete the undergrounding crossing Tank Farm, they have to go an additional several hundred feet to the east and underground effectively to the end of the line.
Right, that's the off-site undergrounding extent. Wasn't that undergrounding included in the original approval, though?
The original approval is conditioned for undergrounding along the project frontage and through the project site in a way that doesn't increase pole count, ultimately. Once you start getting into the weeds of it, as the applicant has done, because of those power lines crossing the street, the technicalities of getting that line undergrounded and ultimately the pole on property lead to the need for the easements, which PG&E has been clear about. It's in the staff report package that you need additional easements. PG&E doesn't have the rights to do the modifications to the sites at United Rentals that would be needed to be done in order to underground this.
Okay, and is it just crickets from United Rentals at this point?
At this point, I believe so. I don't know if the applicant has a further update, but in the letter they've submitted along.
Nodding in concert.
Yeah.
So are there any other tools in the box for this situation? I mean, it's just such a shame because we're going to go out there and make a mess, right? And then we're going to have to come back maybe and fix it. I don't know. Maybe you know where I'm trending with that, with a eminent domain action or something like that.
Yeah, I can't speak to the considerations regarding eminent domain for this specific item on the project. What I will say is the applicant has come forward with trying to provide an interim solution as best as they can to try to facilitate future undergrounding of that line.
I understand that's a tool that's in our box, not in their box.
Correct.
So, well, it's unfortunate. And then on the union.
Before we leave the easement question real quick, do you mind if I just clarify something? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. With United Rentals, we're talking about a failure of them to come to the table and negotiate with the other easement that would be necessary. It's not that they're unwilling, it's that they're still working on environmental remediation. Have we had indications that...
Oh, you said United Rentals, but I think you mean...
Union Oil, sorry, excuse me, yes. The easement necessary for the roundabout, let me clarify it that way. We're saying that one's related to the need to conduct some environmental remediation, but do we believe that they are willing to negotiate an easement once that is completed?
That's a question I'll actually have Luke answer since he's involved with that.
Hey, so I'll note to the applicant teams here, if there's more specific questions about the current status of those negotiations. We've been kept apprised over the last several years through these talks and have been in meetings jointly with the applicant team, with the representatives of Union Oil and the Water Board. And the current status isn't necessarily that there's inaction remediation that needs to be complete. It's additional testing plans to identify potential contaminants in the soil without certainty on what the required actions might be depending on those testing results. And so what we've heard is say from Union Oil is we need to understand what the testing results are going to reveal, what the testing plan is. They still didn't have a finalized testing plan approved, and said, hey, we're not opposed to mutually negotiate on this further, just it's something we can't commit to at this time, and there's not, like I said, timetable. It could be a year, it could be 10 years from now. It's really uncertain and it's outside of our control, which is how we kind of got to this point.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on those two potential easements. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh,
Please
yeah,
continue.
sure. No, I was kind of going there too, because the corner of the Union Oil property for the roundabout, we can't be talking about a lot of land. How much land are we talking about that we would need an easement or would need to purchase from? When I say we, I mean the applicant, but I mean, it's like 50 feet by 100 feet or something?
The easement needed to construct a roundabout it's a pretty large footprint. It's a multi-lane roundabout, which
I'm just talking about that one corner from that goes on the Union property. I see heads shaking no. 3 corners? Oh, thank you. Okay. So
Are you talking about for the utility easement, for the electrical, or for relocating?
no, I'm talking about building the roundabout.
The roundabout, it's a large footprint. You've got
Okay.
deceleration curves, lots of widening, grading, stormwater facilities.
All right, so it's on the south side of Tank Farm as well. And on the other corner too, I thought, isn't that your property?
It's every corner except for their site, unfortunately. So you got the northwest corner, the whole south side of the
Well,
road.
The way I look at that thing, there's 2 corners and a half, right?
Sure, so it's the whole southern half
Okay.
and
And the upper left corner.
upper left corner, correct.
Okay. So it is a fair amount. I didn't realize it was across. Is Chevron involved in any of this, or is it all Union?
It's ultimately a single entity or for the purposes of this discussion. So the underlying property is still owned by Union Oil with
Okay.
Chevron operating, in that context. The ownership is more complex, but
Okay.
it's one entity that we talked with.
And then for some time, we've known that whole property has contamination or contamination potential at least. And aren't there other actions that are helping encourage the recovery, reclamation, remediation, whatever of all that land that used to soak up all that stuff?
Sure. When the project was going through original entitlements, the Chevron was well underway with their remediation project, primarily clean up hydrocarbon contamination on the site. The current testing they're looking at is for PFAS, which wasn't a known issue of concern within the site at that time. So there's new testing protocols, and it's more of something they're less familiar with. So it's why there's some less certainty on time frame with the completion of that process, or what if any remediation actions might be required.
So we've been kind of proceeding through the pollutant du jour process over the decades, I suppose. Okay. Well, all right. It's unfortunate. I mean, this is a key part of the public-facing part of this project, right? And I wasn't on the commission when this went through, so it's my first look at it, really. And so I'll ask what I think I know the answer, a question I think I know the answer to. We really are only able to comment on the proposed changes to this rather than the project as a whole, correct?
That's correct. That's what we're focused on right here.
Right, okay. All right. So there was a lot of material in this package, and I guess one of my kind of overarching comments is just on how it is for us to navigate this kind of material. And it's 214 pages. That includes the agenda and everything else. And I counted up, there's 15 separate documents in the packet. You guys do an amazing job of assembling all this stuff, and so I appreciate that. And I'm just also providing a little feedback that it's tough to get through all this stuff and kind of keep our bearings, or keep, at least for me, I'll speak from my space. And I'm a civil engineer. So a couple things, some of the diagrams that you've shown, John, would have been really helpful. Because, like, I didn't know which pole we were talking about and I drove out there this morning and went and looked, and I think I figured it out, and I connected with you, Tyler, about it. So things like that, and the diagrams, I think, were a little bit hard to follow. The ones that I've seen tonight are much more clear, so that's helpful. And also some kind of a directory would be helpful too, as we enter into this part of the agenda. Here's what you're going to see. You're going to see the staff report, the resolution, the diagrams. Page 63 and 64, there's a couple of pages of documents that it's not clear at all who wrote them or where they came from. So I was going to ask specifically about that, if that was from the city, it was from the developer. That's 63 and 64 of our packet. So Covelop's letters there, all the PG&E easement stuff. So anyway, that's just a general thing and not necessarily a question. On page, so John, your thing said sidewalk level bike lanes in your presentation. Page 12 of our packet mentions elevated bike lanes. Are those the same thing?
I'll let Luke speak to that.
Yes, functionally, yes. The only caveat I'll make is the initial designs we were planning for it's technically a separate sidewalk and one-way directional bike lane, both at an elevated level. And the reason, say, elevated versus sidewalk level with that initially is there's actually about a 2-inch grade differential with a rolled curb between them.
Okay.
To provide like a tactile delineation for visually impaired people.
Okay.
Where the current design would be to bring those flush and and design it as a two-way facility and for the interim, with potential to redesign to a directional one-way bike lane and sidewalk in the future, but functionally above, not at the street level, up at the sidewalk level for the purposes of this conversation.
Okay. Yeah, and bike lanes on Tank Farm are kind of a special consideration, I think. We've talked about it a little bit before this commission, and boy, it's officially designated an arterial parkway, is that right? I mean, it's like a freeway out there, and I have ridden my bike, and I have an e-bike, so I can kind of keep up speed, but it's pretty hairy out there. And so, one of the great things about the roundabouts is it's a traffic calming device as well. So it's really unfortunate. And I'm concerned that with all the turn and the curb cut and traffic that's going to be coming in and out of there, it's a real problem. Plus you have the sightline issue as you come around that corner. And so, the traffic consultants, the transportation consultants issued their report, which is in here too. And everybody's saying, oh, this complies with our standards. I just see a concern there because there's going to be 280 units plus the commercial, and then 650 is going to come online too. And in the meantime, cars are doing 50, 55 plus down that road. And we're supposed to be riding bikes out there too. And so I don't know what leg I have to stand on to complain about that, but I'm concerned anyway.
And just to address that in sort of the bigger picture, back in 2022 or even earlier in 2020, when the project was originally being vetted and all these issues were brought up at the time, the Active Transportation Committee went through that in some detail, so did Planning Commission. The project, as ultimately approved and conditioned and mitigated, was found to be safe, was going to get you to a better place than it is today. So really what we're looking at is the incremental difference between what was approved and what's here today. And that was the importance of going to ATC a month ago so they could weigh in on those questions. Luke was there and had a whole separate, more detailed presentation for them, a lot of technical slides, which we could bring up here, but that's what they went through in some detail, and we're satisfied that you still were in compliance with their concerns in the Active Transportation Plan.
Is anything else planned to help calm the traffic out there and get it closer to the speed limit? We've been doing all this other great work around town on the North Churro Greenway, and Higuera is about ready to proceed. And yeah, I know that it's not fair to put all that on this project, but in the big picture, can we start chipping away at that? And is there anything there to make me feel better about it?
Yeah, that was a key consideration. And something I'll note too is the The modified project designs you see were the result of several iterations and coming back and forth with city staff, our independent traffic consultant, to try to find the best solution that's achievable within the constraints. And speed was a big part of that, as well as sight lines coming around that bend. One of the components you see in the modified project is technically off of this project's frontage, but includes widening that narrow culvert that covers Acacia Creek, because we had concerns about sight lines with the culvert head wall and the railing there coming out of their mid-block driveway. So that was part of the modifications the applicant was able to make as part of this proposal, was to pull that out so it's clear, that line of sight. It was also a big focus in things that you see in this. The center landscape median, we think, helps a little bit with adding some friction and visual, as well as reinforcing, undesirable left turns and added driveways that we're not encouraging them. It also adds value with adding some of those kind of acceleration lanes that let you make a left turn in 2 stages, not just from the new project driveway, but from the existing Santa Fe south of Tank Farm. That actually improves operations at that intersection beyond what they are now.
That's good, because that place is dangerous.
Yeah, and we also looked at too, as soon as we had, confirmation that the roundabout may not be feasible at this time, was, hey, can we justify a traffic signal as like an interim measure? Unfortunately, the new intersection alone doesn't have enough volume to warrant. We looked at all the typical thresholds we could try to check for, and
It would look pretty dumb for about 5 years, wouldn't it?
well, it's really not needed, or were we to the point where we could legally install a signal until something else big happens that also involves the Chevron property. So either Santa Fe on the south gets realigned, which is our long-term plan to connect at this new roundabout intersection, or Santa Fe in the north gets extended further to Prado as Prado gets extended east to Broad.
Right.
Once either of those happens, the roundabout's still needed, just neither of those can also happen until the right-of-way situation's figured out. So we did look at things to try to calm traffic as much as we can within what you can do in the right-of-way and on arterial street. So we have radar speed feedback signs in both directions, encouraging slower speeds. Another thing, it's probably haven't seen around town, but it can be used in more of those kind of highway, rural to urban threshold environments, is these things called like narrowed edge striping, where you'll see these kind of side hatches that are spaced at progressive spacing, so it feels like all of a sudden you're going really fast as you're coming into a more urban boundary. That's something we've seen has been effective in more areas where you have kind of that rural threshold you're coming in. I'll also note that Middle Gap is also county-owned roadway, so while they're open to things that we want to do to fix and improve that roadway, the world's not our oyster in terms of what we want to do there. The last thing I'll note too is that the concerns about bicycle and pedestrian accessibility and activity on that middle stretch of Tank Farm, that is very stressful. Even I'm pretty comfortable myself, and I don't love riding out there. Was saying, well, what can we do to get a shovel-ready project so whenever the right-of-way concerns are kind of resolved, we can maybe pull the trigger on a city-funded or developer-funded shared use path, at least on one side. Kind of before this project, the thought was like, wait until the Chevron property develops, then we'll fix the whole road. And I said, well, who knows when that's going to happen? Yeah. And that's, now you're talking about a $20 million road improvement project. So one of the conditions that was required for the project initially was to prepare 65% level engineering drawings and environmental technical studies for a future shared use path. We've gone back and forth with the ATC and the applicant on what side of the street makes the most sense, what the design looks like, what the potential environmental concerns are now that they've been doing remediation and creating some natural habitats and things, and have, that level of detail that basically when the right-of-way path forward opens up, the city can take those, get them to 100% level, complete an environmental document, and go be several years ahead of the process to try to at least consider advancing maybe a shared use path first, with the rest of the road widening and other improvements along this corridor to come in future years.
Okay, sounds like a lot of thoughts going into that, and that as it deserves. It's one of the last big chunks of undeveloped space that's close in, and it's going to see some activity. And when I first got on this commission, the link came along, and everything I've heard is that that's on a back burner right now. There's other things happening, but the Santa Fe realignment and the airport master plan, which includes extending the runway out into Santa Fe, they'll relocate Santa Fe. Actually, it's Hoover over at that point, right? And so, but was that actually the idea that the relocated Santa Fe would come in at this roundabout?
The last involvement we've had on the county airport's potential planning to relocate that road was that it hadn't been approved yet and still going through environmental review. The plans for that are not consistent with our adopted plans from a land use or circulation side, or even the county's current circulation plans. It created some real concerns for us. We think there's other opportunities to look at for that circulation. So what we're building off is what we've already adopted in terms of the alignment for Hoover and Santa Fe. And my understanding is those various improvements to the airport, some of those might be very challenging to implement, may happen, may never happen. There's not really a funding or implementation plan, but.
Well, it is the preferred alternative right now for the airport, is to extend that runway to the north and relocate Hoover, which means relocating Santa Fe. And so that's what they're all planning on. But it does, you're right, it does bank on FAA approval. But those wheels are turning, and it seems like it's in a 5 to 10 year kind of a range right now.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, we've got the development over at Avila Ranch, and there's a nice bike path that's been constructed as part of that. And it's just kind of begging over by, is it Suburban or over there? And that, boy, won't it be great when we connect that with this? And so, okay. The airport specific plan, I mean, anytime I see housing going in on the departure path of that, I'm a pilot, and I also teach airport planning and design at Cal Poly. Anytime I see housing going in right in the flight path, I'm always concerned, but that seems to be one of these issues that would have had to be addressed in 2022. It's not really on the table today, so I'm hopeful that whoever signs up to buy those places understands that there's planes, big planes, going right over them often, as early as 6 a.m. So that's a concern. Page 180 of the packet is the financial analysis, and it mentions a negative impact. Let me see if I get that right. Thought I had it up here, and there we go. So the third bullet on page 180. On the other hand, if the remainder of developable land is developed entirely consistent, blah, 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 analysts, this analysis estimates a negative net fiscal impact for the general fund, driven largely by the tax sharing agreement. So is that a new thing? It's in red. This is the first time I've seen any of this stuff, and this financial analysis was included, presumably because there's some changes to it, but the number of units isn't changing. The tax structure isn't changing. Is there?
Are you referring to the airport area specific plan?
Yes.
That's a different item.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that one, but that's not this item right here.
Okay. So that's a whole different.
That's a different item.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. I think I've. One last thing here. The plans show 4 driveways or 4 curb cuts on the north side of Tank Farm. One's going to be the extended Santa Fe. And then if you go east, there's 3 more. And you see 2 of them in what's on the screen right there. Is that really going to be the case? Are there going to be 4 entrances and exits to Tank Farm from the north side?
There's the primary access, which is off of Santa Fe, that has 2 driveways north of Tank Farm, and then there's 1 mid-block driveway to this site on Tank Farm that's restricted to right in, right out only. The other driveways you see are actually along the easterly property at 650 Tank Farm, and they have a similar access plan, which is consolidating primary access to the mine body signal and a mid-block right in, right out driveway with a median.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And
multiple driveways be consolidated as each of these projects build out.
at some point, they may connect to Prado?
Yes. So if when Prado extends to Broad Street, I'm being optimistic here, the idea is Santa Fe would extend up and connect with Prado at a roundabout.
Okay. Okay. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for staff at this time? All right, then we thank you very much. We'll move to public comment. City Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
Again, Chair, I haven't received any requests to speak. I know that we've got the applicant team here. Is there anybody else from the public that wanted to comment on this item? Okay, Chair, seeing none.
And I'm not seeing any dedicated time for the applicant here. Are we allowing any applicant time, or I'm sure we're free to ask them questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the applicant has a presentation they'd like to share tonight or whether they're just here for questions.
Yeah, please approach the microphone.
Hi, my name is Damian Mavis with Covelop. We're the project applicant. So first I want to say thank you to city staff for working so hard on this solution. We're in agreement. This is the way to move this important project forward. Our vision for this project was and continues to be to have the most affordable new market rate housing in SLO, sort of fitting between that below market rate level and what it would take to build or to buy a single family home. So it's 280 units. They're all attached. It's a mix of home sizes from 500 square feet to 1,500 square feet. We're approved 3 years ago. And since then, we've been diligently working to solve these issues since. Unfortunately, in that time, housing prices have gone up 16%. So what that equates to our home buyers is about $100,000 increase per average unit. And that money doesn't accrue to us. That's inflation. That's construction costs, material costs, et cetera. But it does certainly, it certainly works to the detriment of our home buyers. And so, clearly time and inflation have not been our friend and continue to erode the affordability of all projects here in town. That being said, I think we're near the finish line or the starting line of construction. With these last few items that need to be addressed, then we're ready to move forward. So we ask that you support these adjustments so we can move along to City Council. Of course, we're available to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you may have just answered the question I was going to ask, which is, are these modifications, would these be remove the last roadblocks, if you'll pardon, I don't know if that's a pun exactly, but is this all you need to get going, or do you foresee anything else that would cause you a delay? And again, I'm not trying to hold you to a timeline here, but.
This is it. I mean, we plan on getting going. I mean, we were in escrow to sell this property to a home builder when all this stuff sort of fell apart. So we intend to do the exact same thing.
I don't blame them. Any other questions for the applicant? I guess we're formally still in public comment, so I guess I will, if there's any other public comment, please approach. Seeing none, we will go ahead and close public comment. And now we have time for additional questions for staff, if any of the commissioners have questions. Not seeing anyone rush to make more comments. I guess we could get into deliberations, or if anyone felt like making a motion. Either way, we could entertain that.
I would like to just note for the commission's consideration, and I would ask that either that staff confirm, but if you look at condition number 7 in the draft resolution, it looks like there is a sentence that was inherently added. The last sentence that starts with the site is physically suited. That sentence, I would recommend that the commission just have that deleted. It does not apply to the rest of the condition.
It's finding number 7.
Sorry, finding
number 7.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just ask that staff confirm that that is not meant to be there.
We're all in agreement that we can strike finding number 7?
It's the last
Just the
sentence.
sentence, not the entire
sentence
finding.
of the finding.
What page is that on?
Are you looking at the packet, or it's of the draft resolution? It's on page 3, finding number 7.
I don't know that I have it on this out here. Let's see. No.
Of the packet? It's page 26 of your packet.
John, if you can stop your share, I can pull it up on the screen.
That's the, as conditioned, the applicant has agreed to an indemnification clause?
That's correct, and that condition should, or that finding should remain in, but there's that last sentence that starts with the site is physically
right,
suited,
okay.
that is not supposed to be there. It's accurate, it's just not supposed to be in that finding.
Okay.
Seems kind of finding-ish. What's the problem with it?
I think the issue there is it's just not relevant to the issues at hand right now.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment that I have a little sympathy when you approve a project, you have really good intentions, you have a great set of conditions, and then as you get into design in real life, things can go wrong. And I want to commend that it appears that the city and the applicant have really worked together to resolve these issues in the best way and to compensate them so in the future, you know, the original conditions can be met. So, thank you.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd be happy to make a motion, and maybe that'll spur some final discussion and thoughts. So I wanted to make a motion to recommend, I might need the language back on the screen, that we adopt basically the resolution presented to us today with the modification that the last sentence on that finding number 7 be removed. So yeah, that would be my motion, I guess.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve staff's recommendation with the modification to finding number 7. Do we have a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay, great. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or deliberation before we call for a vote?
Well, I've already kind of said this, but it's just unfortunate that we can't get this part of it right. And it really just seems like it doesn't reflect on the developer, on you guys at all. It's unfortunate that it's really unfortunate that United Rentals doesn't even answer the phone, and that's pretty upsetting. And you know, they're part of our community too. They're a service to our community, but they should also, you know, be able to address something like this where we're trying to improve really their property as well. And so, and it seems like we don't have much of a choice in this situation. We either approve these changes or we send you guys packing, and I don't want to do that. This looks like another project that is going to help alleviate our housing situation. It's had a lot of time and thought put into it, and so I don't want to do that. So I will be in support of it, but it's just unfortunate that we've gotten to this point. And I'm hopeful that it's not 10 years to get to the roundabout. And I am concerned about Tank Farm and what that's going to be like and how do we fix that. So thanks.
And I think what you're hearing from the commission is, you know, we think this is overall a very good project, and we wish that the roundabout could be included at this time. But overwhelmingly, you know, I think I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners that this is a very good project, and adding 280 units to the housing stock is worthwhile. And we hope that it can be completed as originally proposed at some point in the future. Any other comments before we call a vote?
I'll just make one real quick. Yeah. It's echoing several comments from commissioners, and that is the developer and the city, I think, have set a really good example for how to deal with a really tough situation and go back and kind of, in a sense, reverse engineer a good part of the project, not a good part of the project, but important parts of the project, in a way that can allow us to have some of the benefits earlier. I mean, this is a project that was last at the Planning Commission at least 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe, I can remember. And the other two seem to be non-starters completely. And it's a complicated world. Everything goes up in price. These projects in some ways are too big for the people who proposed them. They've got to farm it out. They've got a contract here and on and on and on to try to get it through. But by working so hard and working so hard together, maybe it'll help others who own properties, particularly I'm thinking of the other two big projects on parcels here, to get something moving and get this whole thing moving. This is a perfect spot for some high density housing and the amenities that go with it. These were high amenity projects all in all, and we've all been waited with bated breath to try to get these moving, and especially the circulation improvements that would go along with it. It's also kind of a gateway to the city from the airport in this whole area, it'd sure be nice to get this moving. So thank you for all your work.
I just want to thank the Active Transportation Committee too, because that's something that's important to me. But the fact that they've already gone through this and had their bite at the apple helps me to feel more comfortable that we can do our bit here. So I just wanted to thank everybody that serves on that committee as well.
All right, I think we're ready for our roll call. Deputy City Clerk, would you mind calling the roll?
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Vice Chair Houghton,
Yes.
and Chair Cooley.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
All right. As is our practice, we'll give you a few moments to leave if you'd like, but you are, of course, welcome to stay for item 4C. All right, we're moving to item 4C. The public hearing item before us is to review amendments to the airport area specific plan. Would Principal Planner Rachel Cohen please present the staff report?
Well, I'm not Rachel Cohen, but I'm also working with Rachel on this project. So again, John Rickenbach.
I was wondering if we were going to have a dramatic
There's no
appearance.
drama here tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, you get me twice for what that's worth. So, but yes, I'm here tonight to present this other project, also within the airport area specific plan, but a very different kind of project. Today, we're looking at reviewing amendments to the airport area specific plan to allow mixed-use residential development within the service, commercial, and manufacturing zones, the CS and M zones, subject to a conditional use permit where appropriate and consistent with the airport land use plan. An addendum to a previously adopted EIR has been prepared in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act. So let's again start with a recommendation, and that's to adopt a draft resolution recommending approval to the City Council to introduce an ordinance to amend the airport area specific plan to allow for mixed-use residential development in the service, commercial, and manufacturing zones, subject to a conditional use permit, and to approve an addendum to the final EIR for the airport area and Margarita area specific plans. Just one thought there, it's confusing. There was an EIR prepared for both the airport area and Margarita areas back in 2003 or 2005, 20 years ago or so. It covered both areas. So when any references to the Margarita area is in that context. We're not otherwise talking about the Margarita area. So a little background about the airport area specific plan. It was adopted in 2005. It plans for about 1,200 acres in the southern portion of the city. It allowed uses and development standards that were guided by the 2002 Airport Land Use Plan. The Airport Land Use Plan at that time included several safety zones and noise contours that limited or prohibited residential or non-residential development. The airport area specific plan does not currently allow for mixed-use development as a result of that. Set that aside and put a pin in that for a second. Another aspect, this is a little more recently, the housing element was updated in 2020 and adopted to include Program 5.5, an important program. It allows mixed use within the CS and M zones without a use permit in the city. And in fact, that has been going on in the city right now. Just not within this area, within the city, not within the specific plan because it's not allowed. In 2021, the City Council adopted an update to the zoning regulations, removing the conditional use permit requirement and allowed mixed use by right within the CS and M zones. An update could not be made to the airport area specific plan to do the same thing because of the existing 2002 Airport Land Use Plan, safety zone, and noise contour limitations. Which brings us to the Airport Land Use Plan. In 2021, the Airport Land Use Commission updated the Airport Land Use Plan, including revisions to the safety zones and noise contours. The ALUP revisions removed the limitation on residential density within Safety Zone 6. That's the general traffic pattern zone, which includes almost everything within the airport area. I mean, it covers the entire airport area pretty much. The removal of these restrictions to residential development does provide an opportunity to consider mixed-use residential projects within the airport area specific plan. So that's where we are today. Based on the updated airport land use plan and the major city goal of housing and homelessness, it's a major city goal that basically says we encourage as much housing as we can in order to house folks that don't have it. The City Council included a work program in the 2023 to 25 financial plan to initiate an update to the airport area specific plan to allow for mixed-use residential development where it's appropriate and consistent with the airport land use plan. So now, the city is proposing to amend the airport area specific plan to allow for mixed-use development within the parcels that are zoned CS or M within any portion of the airport land use plan safety zone 6 subject to a conditional use permit. Just an aside to that, there are density restrictions within all the other safety zones within the airport land use plan that essentially wouldn't allow for development to occur anyway. But the vast majority of the airport area specific plan is within the least restrictive zone, safety area 6, and we have a graphic to show that in a moment. So tonight, your purview is to review the proposed amendments, and it's a wordy kind of thing. It's a lot of text amendment. It's a lot of changes in that regard. For consistency with the city's general plan, its airport area specific plan, applicable zoning regulations, making a recommendation to the city council. There's no actual development associated with this. It's a change to a plan that would facilitate development. So the project description you're considering. The project area includes all property within the airport land use plan safety zone 6 designated as commercial service commercial or manufacturing within this specific plan area. The proposed amendments would allow for mixed use development within those zones with the approval of a CUP subject to making specific findings and development standards outlined in the city's zoning regulations. As I say, no new development is proposed with this application at this time. No existing zoning designations are proposed to change either. It's just what's allowed within those zones to be consistent with what's allowed in the rest of the city. This graphic shows you the specific plan boundaries. That's the red on the outside. The pink that you see is the safety area 6. And all the grayish areas are either the service commercial or manufacturing areas. And I think I've got a graphic here which really highlights those areas within the specific plan that are within safety area 6. And that is to say in the least restrictive areas near the airport. So those are the areas where any future development subject to this change would be possibly considered. So applicants coming forward within those areas, we'd look at the updated specific plan, see if they make the finding, or if we can make the findings necessary to consider those projects, and then have them again go to Planning Commission and Council, and subject to the California Environmental Quality Act as well. So just to give you an idea of how much land we're talking about here, between those two zones, there are about 340 acres within that area. It's roughly a quarter of the entire area. Within those, of that 341 acres, 236 acres are fully within safety zone 6. The remainder are at least partially within that safety zone. So there's no real restriction on anybody's parcel right now within the entire area if you're zoned manufacturing or service commercial. You could potentially come forward with an application, but again, a lot of things would depend on the configuration of your site, the size of your site, neighboring land uses, the kinds of findings you would need to make elsewhere in the city in terms of compatibility. So this is one of the important aspects of the amendment. This is language that would be included in the amendment. It's not the only language, but very important here. To approve a CUP for mixed-use development in those two zones, the Planning Commission shall find the project consistent with development standards outlined within the municipal code and make these findings. One, that there's demonstrable water and sewer capacity. 2, any fiscal impact of the project must be offset to achieve fiscal neutrality. We'll get into that in a bit. 3, that there are no nearby uses that generate sufficient air emissions, noise, odors, vibrations to create an incompatibility with that development. 4, that the proposed residential uses are consistent with land use safety or noise restrictions set forth in the airport land use plan, and the underlined part, and any residential portion of a mixed-use development shall be wholly located within Safety Zone 6. I underline that because when we took this to conformity review in front of the Airport Land Use Commission, not actually last week and then a month ago for the initial read for that, that was one of the conditions they wanted to make sure was included, that we were explicitly focused on Safety Zone 6, at which point they found that this proposal was consistent with the airport land use plan. Finally, a finding that would need to be made is that there's adequate emergency response. We've since amended that. It's not shown on here, but essentially to be consistent with the city's climate change and safety element, the climate action plan, planning that relates to the safety element, that whatever the emergency response requirements as laid out there would apply to this. By using that language, we don't have to continually update whatever that emergency response requirement might be, whether it's 4 minutes, 3 minutes, or whatever the requirements are in the future. And again, the slide shows what it would take, so that there's adequate emergency response consistent with the climate adaptation safety element. Other key aspects of the amendment would be the elimination of a table. It's a land use table, table 4.1, that shows an inventory and build out potential. That table was included back in 2003 when the specific plan was first adopted. It is so hopelessly out of date that it's not usable, and it's not something that's important for determining what projects are allowed or not allowed. It has caused some confusion over the years, and this is an opportunity to remove that. It also reflects build-out assumptions made when the plan was first adopted 20 years ago, which, again, were based in part on restrictions in the airport land use plan that no longer are true. Any estimate of potential build-out within the area is likely to be inaccurate because there's less interest in purely commercial development. So by removing that table, we solve a lot of problems. So, as I noted, the Airport Land Use Commission reviewed this in January and then a week ago, providing some good input in January, ultimately included in the amendment, and they found that the proposed amendment to the specific plan is consistent with the Airport Land Use Plan, subject to conditions which are included in the packet. The key condition, though, as I say, is that the residential development be wholly located within Safety Zone 6. It's also notable that if a parcel straddles two different safety zones, a large parcel, and there are some parcels like that here, a mixed-use project would apply different standards to the different portions of the parcel. By that I mean, if part of a parcel is within Safety Zone 6, part of it's in Safety Zone 4, really the development's going to be focused in Safety Zone 6, and that's where the residential development and the density requirements in the airport land use plan would apply. That's an important thing, because that did come up at the Airport Land Use Commission. Just a brief run through some of the key policies and the consistency of the amendment with those policies. In terms of major city goals, the major city goal relating to housing and homelessness essentially supports additional housing options of any kind that help in that regard. Work Program 3.1.c explicitly calls for updating the airport area specific plan to include mixed use. That's what we're doing here. In the general plan and the housing element, Program 5.5 calls for updating the zoning regulations to allow for mixed use in the CS and M zones, which has occurred elsewhere in the city, and this brings the rest of the city into alignment with that. Program 6.13 calls for considering a general plan amendment or rezone to allow for mixed use. In other words, the theme, allow mixed use where it's possible. The land use element, policy 3.85, again encourages mixed use in commercial areas. Again, a common and consistent theme in the key regulations of the city. So a fiscal study was put together to examine what happens if we do this financially. And of course, this is more focused, this is more a city council kind of issue, but it relates to some of your deliberations as well. And they examined two scenarios for the specific plan. One is, what happens if development were to occur just as it is now, not mixed use, if it builds out as commercial and such. You would see a fiscal surplus, but the problem they found was there's not the demand for that. If you'll note, the plan's been on the books for 20 years and you still don't have much non-residential development out there. So that's a fairly unrealistic outcome in the opinion of the preparers of the fiscal study. They also looked at what the likely development would be with mixed use. And you would end up, because of a larger residential component, a negative fiscal impact. And that's driven largely by the tax sharing agreement with the county that limits property tax revenue in this portion of the city and none from the residential aspect. So the question then becomes, how do you achieve fiscal neutrality? And so Cosmont came up with different recommendations to get there. Note that one of the findings is that if you approve projects within this area, they have to be fiscally neutral one way or another. Cosmont recommended, in the big picture, a community facilities district would solve that problem. Similar to the mechanism used for Avila Ranch to offset the cost of services to be applied to the entire specific plan area. We don't have that now, and that's a process to get through. But in the absence of that, you'd still be able to approve projects if development could offset their own fiscal impacts on a project-by-project basis. And that could be done through development agreements, through any number of arrangements to be able to provide for the services that are needed to achieve fiscal neutrality. But again, that's a project by project. Ideally, we'd avoid that every single time if we did have something like a CFD in place that would solve that problem on the outside. Cosmont looked at other options, including renegotiating the tax sharing agreement with the county, or something they describe as an infrastructure financing district, a negotiation with the county, and a minimal amount of commercial use requirements to achieve fiscal neutrality, but ultimately they didn't recommend any of those, partly because of the lack of feasibility in working with the county on doing something that's probably, from their perspective, working against their interests financially. In terms of a minimum amount of commercial and mixed-use projects, again, that's an unrealistic manipulation of the market we've found in terms of developers are going to come forward with what works. If you required a minimum amount of commercial development, say 100,000 square feet, and there's no market for that, you're not going to get a project that does it. That was the finding of the financial consultant in this case. And then this action would have to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. As I say, a final EIR that covered the airport area and Margarita area was certified in 2003. In this case, an addendum to the final EIR has been prepared for the proposed amendment. That's included in your packet. If individual developments were to come forward in this area, they'd be subject to project-specific CEQA review, as any other project would, whether that's a negative declaration or an EIR, or we don't know yet. It's a case-by-case basis as applications come forward. So that's the outline. So the next step would be, whatever your recommendation to council would be, the council would consider this on May 6th as the agenda is set up right now, and we're here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the presentation. Any questions from the commissioners at this point? Go ahead.
Hopefully just a couple of quick ones. The fiscal neutrality component that you mentioned for future projects, is that language already built into the recommendation we would bring forward, or would that need to be amended in at this point?
That's already baked in. It's part of the amendment, the language in there. Okay. And I'll just pull this up to see you have it, because we may circle back to this again. Part of the amendment, literally text changes to the specific plan, would include that in there, and it's the fourth item here.
Okay, great.
Or I'm sorry, it's the second item right here. So you need to have fiscal neutrality as part of whatever approval would happen.
And then the second one, there was a mention about the lack of demand for new commercial development or standalone commercial development. But I guess my question is more around the losing of overall commercial space in the city, because in my experience, once you kind of go residential, it's really hard to bring it back. And the demand is not there today, but you never know in the future, I guess, or maybe, you know, other experts do know and are more familiar with it. But are there any concerns that we might be like limiting our commercial space, or are we oversupplied at this point?
It's a fair question. It's the kind of question that the fiscal impact consultant looked at. And it's true, the southern portion of the city was contemplated as the big area for industrial and commercial growth 20 years ago. what's been found out and has played out since then is that hasn't actually happened in the way it was envisioned at the time. And so any fiscal impact study has to account for market trends, actual trends that have occurred in the city to project what future demand would be in the future. And so when they looked at this, they did find if you actually built out the way it's designed, you would have fiscal positive. But they also found that there's no demand for that based on what they've been seeing, and that's been a trend for the last 2 decades as well.
Okay, that's kind of what I understood. I'm thinking of all the different units that we're looking and we've approved recently, and many of those people are going to need a place to work and manufacture things and sell things and provide services. So I just want to be mindful anytime we look at industrial and commercial spaces that we're not eliminating stock we might need in the future for the city's purposes, for a mixed use of.
It's also notable that it doesn't eliminate those zones. There's still commercial service and manufacturing zones. If they go mixed use, they go mixed use. If they go fully commercial or industrial, they go that way. This allows a little more flexibility within the market to respond to whatever conditions come forward. And then the Planning Commission, ultimately the council, can decide whether that project, whatever it might be, is appropriate for the city's long-term goals on these issues.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm on.
Did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to reinforce what John had pointed out, was that it's still zoned the same way. So if there's a huge need for commercial, granted you have residential there, but at some point the buildings could be readapted or demolished or something as pressures change. Correct.
Yeah, or I would add, where there's vacant land, and there's significant vacant land, you don't have to consider mixed use there. You certainly can do that now. And I think what you're going to see is applications come forward based on whatever the market is for the projects that are necessary. You do have housing demand, which is currently a big deal. It probably is going to continue to be a big deal. So again, there's just, what this does is allow a lot more flexibility for the city to plan for the future in this area that doesn't exist right now.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
First, a couple, because maybe this helps prove my point about the difficulty of getting through the packet. I thought this was part of the other 600 tank farm, because that it was related. They actually are. It's in the safety zone a little bit, and I didn't put this in the proper context when I was reviewing it. So, but here we are, and here I am. So, Commissioner Munoz Morris, thank you for that question about, are we going to run out of commercial? Are we, do we need to keep our powder dry, so to speak, on that front? I was thinking the same thing, and I think you're right that once it goes to residential, you can't undo that because you have to evict and something has to become completely vacant, which that kind of never happens, right? And I can picture situations where, I mean, maybe we're just waiting, and maybe things are going to change, maybe they're not. I guess the question is, if we do this, well, first of all, mixed use. So if I have a property in this CS or the M zone and I decide, I want to do mixed use, I want to do 500 residential units and I want to do a little warehouse or a little shop over here. Does that count as mixed use? And I'm not familiar enough with what's allowed there. So maybe that's a Tyler question or.
Yeah, I can take a stab at
Okay.
that. So currently we don't have minimum or have thresholds for minimum commercial in the CS and M zone as a part of a mixed use project. I think the point of having a conditional use permit and some of these requirements that you're seeing on the screen here regarding what needs to be considered directly relate to the balance of commercial to residential. What's the fiscal impact to the city? How does that look? What are some of the ways that can be resolved? The point of the conditional use permit is it's there to, I think, address some of the comments that I've heard from the commission in terms of there is an additional entitlement needed to do this in that area. Whereas the rest of the city, the CS and M zone lands, it's allowed by right. When we updated our housing element in 2020, one of our work programs that came out of that was recommended by HCD to remove our conditional use requirement in that area or the rest of the city, and so we did that. But we do have some additional considerations in the airport area specific plan, and so we are recommending that conditional use permit to allow for a level of review to talk about mix of commercial, residential, appropriate locations and services.
Okay, so if I have a property in the M zone in the airport area, specific plan area in the safety zone 6, I could propose a purely residential project. But I'd have to get a conditional use permit, and I have to come through this process.
No, it needs to be a mixed use project. So you can't have purely residential.
But you said there's no minimum commercial.
There's a requirement for commercial, but there's no minimum square footage requirement or threshold.
Okay.
So if somebody came in with 1,000 units and 100 square feet of commercial, there would be a discussion before the Planning Commission, or probably a lot earlier than that, about whether that's the right mix.
Okay, and the same thing would apply in the M zone?
Yes, both the CS and M zones.
Okay, like I have a little wood shop over here, but I'm doing 500 units over there. Okay, so we would have some subjective and perhaps objective review of that. Okay.
And along those lines, one of the things that we looked at and had our fiscal consultant look at is, what if we required a minimum amount of commercial?
No, you mentioned that.
And the thought was,
the market's not asking for that.
Exactly. So the idea to consider whatever the application is, and it may be it's just 100 square feet of commercial, does that pass the test from your standpoint? Gives you a lot of leeway as Planning Commission to make recommendations.
Well, thanks for the reminder that if you have CS or M zone property elsewhere in the city, you can do the same thing. And so why should this be different? Well, why should it be different? I can think of one reason, because it's going to be tough to meet that condition number 3 with no noise pollution or air pollution, because it is right where the planes are taking off, and it's on the left-hand traffic pattern for 2-9, and so it's noisy for sure. I know you got these noise contours, but you know the morning plane that takes off, it's pretty disturbing even as far out as like Laguna Lake, and so I'm really protective, I guess, of the airport, just because there's airports all across the country are under threat. Santa Monica, they're trying to close that down because of noise and so on. And I don't think we're anywhere near that, really. But if you were to say this is a place that is perhaps more suited to commercial, service, manufacturing, industrial, light industrial than residential, there's a pretty good reason for that, just being near the noise and also the exhaust that comes from jets taking off. And in the meantime, the airport is we've been adding flights. We're bringing in bigger planes. We're bringing in the A319s and 320s now, and all this extension of the runway and so on. So it's going to continue. And by the way, runway 725 is supposed to be removed. And so that will actually take away, there's not much that happens over on that side anyway. So that's the reason that I can think of. But on the plus side, this is all pretty close in to the city, and it's within range of, I mean, some of it is the project we just looked at, and it's going to be connected to our active transportation system, and you can do a lot out there without having to. If the airport were 5-10 miles out of town and we allowed lots of residential, then we would be creating, I think, more of a traffic pattern or problem and so on. So, all right.
And to that point, I think it's worth adding also that what this does is avoid a problem that has been coming up sort of consistently over the last few years. For example, 600 Tank Farm Road. The conformity issues or allowing that mixed-use project was done on a project-specific basis there. Avila Ranch had its own issues that had to deal with the airport. So if every project that comes up in these areas has to deal with everything individually, it's more problematic than if there's a blanket regulatory framework that allows enough flexibility for you to address those issues, whether it's noise or safety or the changing conditions at the airport, which may be different in 10 years than they are today, but allows a framework for that to happen appropriately.
And Avila Ranch is wholly within the red line, and it's is it in the pink zone too? Yeah, it is, right?
It leaves some open space and cut down the height or something.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's that kind of squiggly line on the lower left. Okay. Last thing, this wholly located business that the ALUC was asking for, were they concerned that you would have a little bit of safety zone 6 and then bleed into safety zone 4 or 5 rather than going the other direction?
Something like that. The idea being the density requirements in anything but safety zone 6 are so restrictive that any amount of residential within those zones would be inconsistent with the airport land use plan. So they
Okay.
want to make sure that whatever residential happens stays completely within safety zone 6.
Okay.
Then you'd be consistent with the airport.
Yeah,
In fact,
so
just so you know, the city's density requirements are much more restrictive than the airport land use plan's density requirements are for safety zone 6. And that was something that they
Okay.
weren't entirely sure of, but we made them aware of that.
So the yellow part of this diagram that you have here, that is, and especially the zone 1, the runway protection zone, and then the approach departure zone, zone 2, we don't want to do, we want to really avoid doing residential there. And so I think that that's the case, right?
Well, yeah, this graphic, I think, shows it all.
Yeah.
Anything that's gray are the only places where we'd consider anything.
Okay.
And all of those areas are outside of those restrictive zones.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Jorgensen, did I see your light on?
Yeah, I don't have a very well-framed question, but I'm trying to understand, the fiscal impact is not at the core of what the commission's got to deal with, but it's certainly very relevant to the whole process of annexing land from the county and working out a deal that works for both sides. But it sounds like the consultant's recommendation of, it sounds like a mellow ruse, essentially, that they're recommending, which means that the home buyers don't see that in the price of the house, but they are going to make a monthly payment forever, essentially, or until the bonds or whatever bonds or developer paid off. How does that relate to the fiscal neutrality piece? And then I guess a slightly related question that I just, for my own information, there seems to be some difference in the way this plays out with a vertically stacked multi-use project versus horizontally using different spaces on the parcel for multiple uses. And could you just help me out a little bit?
I'll just address the second one first. Mixed use could take all kinds of forms, right? Could be horizontal, vertical, depends on the parcel configuration, the project concept, all that. So it leaves open any of those possibilities. In terms of the fiscal issues, sure, a CFD such as you have at Avila Ranch or at San Luis Ranch, the idea is, you're right, there's a fee that isn't necessarily clear to the potential home buyer unless they're really looking carefully and understanding that. But the whole point of that is to offset the cost of the public services that would otherwise be provided through city funds that don't exist. So the idea there being, it's a way to achieve fiscal neutrality from a regulatory sense and make it work. There's a certain fee goes with this kind of project. Without that, you'd have to find other ways to achieve the same result, which can be done, but the idea is to provide either a blanket for the entire area or a case-by-case basis of doing that.
Or the developer could provide the public services.
There are ways of doing it. There are different ways to do this.
It's, everybody's got skin in the game, I guess. Huh? Know it or not. Thank you.
I think, I want to follow up on that, and you hit on kind of where I was going to. First of all, I just want to thank you for framing what we're looking at here as basically being consistency with existing regulations, but we're all kind of zeroing in on the fiscal piece here too. And my question is just about the recommendation. Are we actually recommending to the council that they, establish a CFD?
Go ahead, John.
Okay, no, that's not part of the recommendation right now. What you're recommending is whether or not to go forward with this amendment to the specific plan. That recommendation of a CFD is embedded in that as a concept that would be, it's actually in the specific plan, the language, and the language is included in your packet, says future projects need to be fiscally neutral. The consultant says one way to do this is a CFD. that's as far as it goes. So that's a question to be taken up at a future date.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And just conceptually, and this may be a question for other staff, assuming that a CFD is established at some point, would finding number 2 of the CUP be presumptively met?
Well, that would be through that analysis that we'd have to look at the CFD, have to look at the cost of service and make that finding. I did want to mention just on the question about, we were talking about fiscal neutrality a little bit more. I mean, there's a lot of projects or a lot of sites that are already developed with commercial out there. Some have office, some are, a range of uses in this area, right? And so fiscal neutrality could happen with a site adding additional housing and looking at it holistically with the existing development, the existing commercial development. So there could be instances where somebody comes in with a conditional use permit, case-by-case review of fiscal neutrality, they might be able to accommodate that with already what's there from a commercial standpoint.
So just to make sure I'm clear on this, are you saying that fiscal neutrality might be assessed for the entire area, or is it always project by project?
Well, for a project by project, I'm saying if you have existing commercial, right, revenue generating existing commercial, and you add residential to that site, it may be in balance, right?
Got it. Okay, I understood that point. Any other questions or comments?
Can you, everything we're talking about is within the city limits, right? We're kind of bumped up, and the airport itself is in the city limits too, is that right? Or is that county?
That's county.
So it's stitched right around the airport itself, and then the safety areas and zones are in the city, right?
They extend both in and outside of city limits.
Okay. All right, I just wanted a reminder of how that was working, so. But everything with the heavy black line is all in the city limits, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
That's right. There's no annexation
That's why we're
going on
talking
here.
about it.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Just one quick question then for staff. So the pink along Buckley, which is the zone 6, is probably outside the city limits. Is that why the zoning is not shown, or is it just that the zoning is at CS or M?
It's within the city. For example, in the bottom left-hand corner, that's Avila Ranch down there, north of Buckley. That's in the city. Everything more or less over there is in the city. It's not shown because all we're showing here are the CS&M zones.
Okay, so it's a different zone.
Yeah.
And just, we don't have the city limit line on here, but Buckley Road, the red line, everything south of that is county.
I keep asking about the link thing, which I know is back burner, but wasn't there a part of that was to annex a lot of the land that's in the middle in there? Was that part of that deal? Or is everything that's in between Buckley and Tank Farm, is that all city limits up until Hoover at least?
Yeah, that area north of Tank Farm, which is where the link was, is in city limits.
And then between Buckley and Tank Farm and Hoover and say South Higuera, that's all in the city too?
More or less, I think that's accurate, yeah.
Yeah, there's just a hole there where the airport is.
Okay. Yeah, and you can see the yellow fan coming off right by the word Buckley on the right. And that's the safety zones for the 725 runway. And that runway is going to, right now the plans, that's going to go away. So things are going to change there. It's going to turn into hangars and possibly commercial space as well out there, so.
And so am I correct in assuming that that would mean that if we move forward this recommendation, that when and if that runway goes away, the zone might also change and we would be?
That's a good point.
Would we be?
So one of the things, the way it's deliberately written right now in the proposed amendment is to allow for the possible flexibility in the airport land use plan changing in the future. The idea is to be consistent with the airport land use plan. The city has to be, no matter what. So this accounts for that future condition, whatever it might be. A good point to raise, though.
But if that yellow fan shaped thing turns pink, then it would apply there too.
And it would potentially open up areas there. Now, all that to say, again, we're focused on CS&M zones. We're showing all the CS&M. So if it's not shown on this, it's not there within those yellow areas. So it's sort of a moot point.
All right, I think we've done a lot of talking so far. So why don't we open it up to public comment? Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Haven't received any requests to speak. I'm not seeing any acknowledgement in the audience either.
Okay, last call for public comment. All right, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission. And any other comments or questions for staff? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the draft resolution that we are considering.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional deliberation or comments before we call for a roll call?
I just wanted to clarify, we did have one amendment in the staff presentation, and just wanted to clarify whether that was included. Yes.
Sorry, would you like to modify your motion?
Which was what did we do?
That blue text?
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'll be happy to modify the motion to add the amendment.
And I'll still second that modified version.
Okay. Last call for deliberations, comments, questions.
Our lawyer looks worried.
She does.
Sorry, could you just clarify, is the only amendment to that condition number 5? Okay, so the motion is to adopt the resolution subject to the amendment to finding
required
number
finding
5.
5.
The amendment to the amendment.
Okay, great, thank you.
And that's the only thing that's changed since the packet was produced, right?
Right, and just to be clear, this is language that would be included in the text of the specific plan amendment.
Right.
Okay, I think we're in agreement. We have a motion and a second to approve staff's recommendation with the amendment to finding number 5. Seeing no more red lights, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Vice Chair Houghton,
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz Morris,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Chair Cooley.
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, now we're moving on to staff updates and agenda forecast. Would Deputy Community Development Director Tyler Corey please provide the update?
All right, thank you, Chair Cooley, members of the commission. Looking out to our next regularly scheduled meeting, currently we have for March 12th, just one item. It's the general plan annual report. We will have that, obviously, staff report published a week before, so we're just finalizing a few details in that document, and happy to present that to the Planning Commission. It's just kind of an informational report, receive and file, and then we'll be on to the City Council at their next meeting, and then off to the state. We'll be sending that per our requirements to report on our progress towards implementing our goals in our plan. So that's on for 312. After that, I don't have anything, I don't believe right now, for the 326. So that one may be canceled. But then looking at the 4/9 Planning Commission date, we looks like we potentially have a couple items. One of them is we're making some amendments to our cannabis regulations, some cleanup items that we're going to bring forward, as well as a street abandonment out on San Luis Drive. So that'll be on consent, that street abandonment. But the cannabis regs would be a zoning regs amendment, recommendation to City Council on that one.
That's on April 9th?
Yes.
Okay, before we wrap up, any questions for Tyler or any other staff? Any requests for follow-up? All right, just like to thank Mr. Rickenbach. We threw a lot at you tonight, so thank you for helping us out so much. So the next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled for March 12th, 2025 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers of City Hall, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo. We are adjourned.